Hey guys, it's Belle, and in this video I want to read through for you a small excerpt from the first one of the short stories included in the Vitas Patrum Emergentium. Now, I've already done one of these stories in its entirety, and you can find that video linked in the description below. I titled it something like A Heterosexual Man in Visigothic Era Portugal. This one is from the same time period, the same group of people. It's set in Merida, but it actually tells a near-death experience of a small boy named Augustinus who passes out in the street and dies and is taken up to heaven. But what's fascinating about this is it seems to present to us what the Visigoths thought heaven would be like, and it has some unique features, not only unique relative to other depictions of heaven in the time period, but which also seem to maybe hint at some of the Germanic culture underlying the Visigoths as a people, because we don't have Gothic literature surviving in its original language, nor do we really have very much in the way of secular poetry on secular themes, as we have, for instance, Manius Felix and Nordius's panegyric on King Theodoric of the Ostrogoths. All the literature from Visigothic Spain is coming from monastics, with the exception of a couple of pieces by, or at least attributed to King Sigebert, but those don't really pertain to the Visigoths themselves. They pertain to Roman saints and to astronomy. This, however, is a text that was written by monks in the Visigothic period about Visigothic subjects, and I believe this gives us some insight into their view of heaven. So without further ado, I'll read it, and as usual, if you want to have a go at pausing the video and translating it using the gloss before I give my translation, feel free to do so. So, Latin reads, Et dum ec dixisset ita exorcis est, fui in loco amueno, ubi erant multi odoriferi flores, herbe viridissime, rose et lilie, et corone ex gemmis et auro multe. Bella olos erica innumerabila, et tenuis flabrari figurore, flatus suo cunctura frigerans. Ibi etiam vidi sedes innumerabiles positas ad dextram levamque, in medio verbo multum sublimior posita praeminebat. Ibi nomque astavant pueri innumerabiles, omnes honorati et pulcri paverantes mensas, et convivium eximium non de qualibet decure, sed tantum de altilibus omnis parabatur verculorum copia, et omniaque parabatur erat candida instar nibis, et presso labantur adventum sui reges. Now, what does all of this mean? So, et dum ec dixisset, and when he, this is Augustus, had said these things, he had told the villagers who found him passed out in the street, that he had passed out in the street and had a vision. Ita exorcis est. He started speaking thus. Fui in loco amueno, I was in a comfortable place, ubi erant multi odoriferi flores, where there were many sweet-smelling flowers. Herbe viridissime, the greenest grasses, rose et lilia, roses and lilies. So he's clearly imagining heaven as having some kind of fields, and we'll see later on down here that Christ is actually going to show the boy to his garden after this feast. And there were corone e gemmis et auro multe. There were crowns made out of gems and gold. Now, this is one of those things which I reckon is probably a small reference to the Germanic substrate, because, of course, the giving of rings and crowns is really important. Now, this word, bald in most of the Germanic languages means a ring or a crown or an armband, just like a circular bit of metal, and it could be translated in certain contexts as the Latin corona, which is crown. And so it's possible that this could be a reference to the kinds of rings that were passed around from ruler to subjects in much of the Germanic poetry that we have, And the reference to corone here could be a sort of an echo of that theme from Germanic poetry. So there were many crowns of gems and gold, and vela holoserica innumerabilia, and countless silk veils or curtains. So this is quite wealthy and indicating also some degree of contact with the Silk Roads, and so international trade in the Visigothic kingdom. And in fact, we have references, I believe, in the writings of Eugenius Toledo and other places to Visigothic clergymen kitting out their altar servers with silk robes. So we know that it wasn't uncommon for them to have silk. Et aer tenuis, and a thin or a tender air, flabrare frigore flatus suo, with the gentle chill of its breath, basically, cunctare refrigerans, refrigerating or cooling down all things. Now, this is another very curious sort of reference here, because it's the first time I've ever seen heaven described as cool or a cold place. Normally, if anything, it's described as hot and warm because it's got association with the sun and ascending upwards towards the sun. But no, it seems to be that the Visigothic idea of heaven is a cold place. And given that they were in Spain, this is maybe not the most surprising thing that they would dream of a cold paradise. Ibi etiam vidi sedes innumerabiles positas. So there I also saw countless chairs set up, and I reckon this is some kind of vestigial echo of the mead hall format, but it's been altered slightly to fit the theological requirements of Christianity, because the mead hall, as it appears in Old English and in Old Norse poetry, is geographically limited, and therefore space at it is valuable, which is why in the first lines of Beowulf it says how shield-shaving monogam maethum meatadla ofter shared na threatum, that is. So often shield-shaving, with the threats of death, took away the mead seats from many people. So removing a people's ability to sit at that mead table, because there's only a finite amount of space at any of the halls. But here that problem is resolved, because that problem of scarcity leads to competition between different lords, it leads to violence and intrigue and plot. But here that problem is still solved, even though the architecture is still the same, right? We still have this image of a hall with seats at a banquet, but instead of it being a finite number of seats, we suddenly have an infinite number of seats. And that way everybody is capable of buying into it, because the religion at the time was literally Catholic, which also means for everyone. So what I see in this is sort of an echo of the mead hall idea written onto the Christian idea of heaven and then adapted to suit its needs. And so those chairs were set up ad dextram levamque, to the right and to the left. In medio vero multum sublimior apposita preminebat. So there was one which was much finer than all of them, standing forth or being eminent among all of them. Ibi namque astabant pueri innumerabiles ornes ornati et pulchri. So in that place there were countless boys, all of them decorated and very beautiful. Preparantes mensas, preparing the tables, and this can also refer to the meals themselves, so there's a bit of ambiguity here. Et convivium eximium, and a brilliant banquet. And this is a really curious line here. Non de qualibet pecude, not from any pack animal, sed tantum de altilibus omnis parabatur ferculorum copia. But all the abundance of victuals was prepared only from, altilibus literally means from the high ones. It's a reference to birds here. And this is actually met with elsewhere in Visigothic poetry. Eugenius of Toledo has a lot to say about birds and them being really fancy, and some of them being very prestigious food to eat. And this also could have something to do with the colour of the flesh, because in one of his poems, which I covered it, and it's titled Indisco Argentea, about a sort of silver dish, Eugenius makes reference to white food being more prestigious in Visigothic dining, and I've covered that in my video Learn Gothic Through Modern Archaeology if you want to read that poem in its entirety with a Gothic translation. So I wonder if it's because birds are more likely to have white meat that this is why the food in heaven is described as being only of, poultry, basically of birds, rather than from pack animals which might have red meat. And then the boy goes on to say, Et omnia quae parabantur erat candidar instar nivis. So all the things that were being prepared were white like snow. Et presto labantur adventum sui regis. And these boys were awaiting the arrival of their king, and that king, of course, is Jesus. Now, later on in this story, there's a feast, and Jesus damns some souls to hell, and then Jesus takes the boy on a walk through a garden. It's a really fascinating place, and we really see in the garden scene as well how we see some echoes of the poetry that Manius Felix and Nordius writes about King Theodoric, and we see that in his poem called De Hortu Regis, and I covered that in my video called The Ostrogoths Were Queer. And so we can see in this short story, which is coming from the monastic class, but we're still seeing this substrate and the background of a Germanic warrior culture still bleeding through nonetheless. And we see some unique features which give us a sense of what the Visigoths imagined heaven to be like. So there we go. I hope you guys enjoyed that little tidbit. If you want me to teach you Latin or any of the other languages I do on this channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon, which will be linked in the description of this video. You can also join my Discord server, where I tend to post these glosses as pictures before I turn them into videos, so you'll get early access there. And it's also a fun community of like-minded people. We get together, we share memes, and sometimes we do movie nights. It's a fun time. You should come and join us. Until next time, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you had a nice day. Bye everyone.